Here in Norway, I'm considered quite loud and extrovert. But after 29 years in Norway, when I go to Italy to meet my family, they'll often say to me, "Are you okay? What do you mean, are you okay? You look really, really sad." In Norway, the speech patterns they're really good at taking turns, talk, 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 talk. And the other person nods and then they stop and then they you know how it works. In Italy, it's overlap, overlap, overlap. I would meet someone that I'd known for a little while and I would just say, "Oh, you look a bit tired today. What's up? You must have had a really heavy night last night." We use that as a bonding, to banter with people. And they look at me like, "No, I'm just tired,
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Dating Beyond Borders podcast. I'm thrilled to introduce today's guest, Pellegrino Riccardi, an award-winning TEDx speaker and an expert in culture, communication, and relationships. These are exactly the topics we'll love exploring here on the podcast. In this episode, we'll dive into the fascinating cultural differences from levels of expressiveness and why some cultures tend to complain more than others to the concept of the economy of words. Pellegrino, it's such a pleasure to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Really cool. That was a really, really, really out of the blue invitation. And I was instantly fascinated by what you do, actually. So I dug into absolutely. It's really cool.
I had a chance to watch your TED Talk, and there's a reason that I got that many views and engagement. And we obviously have a lot of overlaps in what we talk about when it comes to cultural differences. We're both very interested in the topic. And I can also sense that you living in Scandinavia has made you even more interested in this topic because Scandinavians are renowned for their, let's just say, differences in communication. They're quite unique as a region. So, for anyone that just kind of tuned in, they don't know, what your cultural background is. So you are of Italian descent. You are raised in the UK and you've lived in Norway for 28 years, correct?
That is correct. Yeah, quite a mixture, actually. I don't know many other people who have that particular mix, that kind of Latin, Anglo-Saxon, Scandinavian mix. It's quite unique, even though they're all European. And they've got quite a few things in common because they're European. There are lots of big differences there. And I got interested in this subject as a form of therapy, actually, because I really struggled when I first came to Norway. It was really tough. I've traveled all over the world, and this was a particularly difficult nut to crack. It was quite tough. So I did a lot of complaining. And then one day my wife said, "Stop complaining to me, complain to others." So I thought, okay. And you can't just complain to people. It helps to complain to people with a bit of humor. And people laughed and they learned. And suddenly I felt better. And it ended up turning into a career, actually. Now I tell Norwegians about how they are as people and how people perceive them. It's a cool gig.
You know what I love about Scandinavians and Norwegians as well is that they kind of have a sense of humor when it comes to understanding their own, let's just say uniqueness. They can laugh about it. They can say, we are so reserved. We are actually like this. I haven't found this so much around the world where people could just laugh at themselves so much, even though they are so reserved and they may seem humorless.
Yeah, I have to. I think if there's a nation in the world that has the most self-irony, it has to be the British. I think the British are really good at it. I was raised in the UK, great self-irony, and we're really good at making fun of ourselves. But they do actually. They really. I tell you what, Norwegians, and I think this is the Nordics generally, because I've traveled and worked a lot in the Nordics. They're really interested in what other people think about them. So they're ready to sit there and listen, and providing you do it in a kind of, how can I put it? Not in a moany, whingy way. Nobody likes to hear that. But if you do it in a kind of constructive, insightful, humorous way, they really like to listen to it and they like to learn, actually. And I remember I saw one of your previous episodes where you had a guest talking about Denmark. And there were lots of comments, and I went in the comment. A lot of the comments were Danes who were a little bit annoyed that somebody was saying these things about them, and it's not true, and it's not like that. And okay, everyone has their point of view, but I find the Danes a bit more sensitive than the Norwegians. I think the Norwegians take it a bit more on the chin, actually. They're quite good at listening to what people think about them.
I know exactly the podcast you're referring to, the the cultural coach, she got a lot of negativity, and I think a part of that comes down to the fact that she's an American and she moved to Denmark and she got judged because she's an American.
Could be actually, and I like to think that I'm an open-minded person. So I was reading the comments and listening to her. Her comments were excellent, actually. There very many of them. Most of them were. I shared a lot of the views, but yeah, you may be right there. Because she's American, there's a bit of an unfair start. Americans get a bit of a bad rap, and a lot of my work actually is involved in understanding and being aware of our own prejudices towards other cultures, and accepting them. In other words, that it's okay to be prejudiced. We're designed to be prejudiced, actually. We're designed to be very suspicious of others, and we're designed to kind of go on the defensive when people talk about us in negative ways. I found the episode really interesting and really fascinating, actually.
Yeah, thank you. Now, talking about you specifically, I mean, being Italian, British, Norwegian, I mean, obviously you identify with one of those more than others, but let me just start with, do you feel more Italian? Do you feel more British, or do you feel more Scandinavian?
Depends where I am. I can pick and choose. I can actually pick and choose, and I do actually. I do it quite actively. If I was watching a soccer game, a football match, and England were playing Italy, I'm Italian the whole way, right? But my native tongue, my first language actually is English. My second language is a Neapolitan dialect that my parents raised me in. They're from the Napoli area. My third language is Norwegian now, and I can be very Norwegian when I want to as well. So I'm kind of a chameleon, able to kind of adjust in any situation. But if I normally say that my heart is really Italian,
Mm.
I have some really powerful Italian values deep down inside here, which stem from my childhood, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah, I find it's interesting, as you said, depending on where you are on the context. Because if you are in, let's say, in Italian in Norway, I can find that a lot of expats they may be complaining about the way things are in Norway, but then let's say 10 years later they move back to Italy and they
Yeah.
can no longer deal with the queuing, or as you talked about the queuing system. People just kind of do whatever they want, and the way the systems are run, and the expressiveness and the impatience that, especially when we're talking about Southern Italy, right? So I find that it can be hard. The more you live abroad, the more it's so hard to pick a place where you feel fully at home.
Yeah. I mean, I was in the UK last week, actually, in my hometown where I grew up as a kid. Beautiful place, a city called Bath in the southwest of the UK. Fantastic city, beautiful. But you know what struck me immediately was how dirty the UK is. The streets of many towns are really dirty, and they're littered. And because here in Norway, it's very unusual to find litter on the streets. In fact, my Italian friends, when they visit me, they just look around. They have a little game amongst them. Who can find the first cigarette butt? See if you can find a cigarette butt on the streets, and they can never find them. It's really weird. So yeah, and that's when I kind of feel Norwegian. It's like, wow, it's a bit dirty here, and well, why don't they pick up the litter? And you're absolutely right. Countries move on, we move on. My home now is here in Norway. A kind of dark humor in a way, but I often say, I'll probably be buried here. If you're going to come and visit my grave, it will probably be in Norway, because that's where my kids are now. It's where my house is, my life is here. And my father's the same. My parents moved to the UK. They never moved back to Italy. My mother passed away many years ago, but she, her grave is in the UK, and my father is still there. And I often make fun of my father and say he's more British than me, because he's been there more years than I have, which he doesn't particularly like. But your home, that cliche, your home is where the heart is. And my heart is here now. My work, my place, my kids, they're all here.
Do you still find that parts of your personality are more British in certain sense, Italian in
Oh,
certain sense?
yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, humor, it's a lot of British in me still. Um, I'll stand on there. I'll stand on a hill and say the Brits have the best humor in the world. Why? Because it's the least reverent, if that makes sense. That nothing is beyond humor in the UK. So I like that, especially in the kind of world we live in today, where people seem to be so afraid to share their opinions with others, right? Fear of getting cancelled or whatever. I find that kind of healthy, the fact that you can make fun of just about anything. That's where I'm really British still. Having said that, when I first moved to Norway, I made some real blunders by going a bit too far with the humor. Humor I considered quite acceptable in the UK wasn't quite as acceptable here in Norway. So that's all part of the learning process. But temper-wise and expressiveness, even though I sound very British, I'm really Italian. The temperature can go up really quickly, actually, really fast.
Yeah. Speaking of, of the sense of humor, I do agree with you. I think British humor is the best. And it's the self-deprecating kind of dark sense of
Yeah,
humor. It's not in
yeah,
your face like American humor, even just watching shows and movies, you can pick out, British sense of humor really fast. You had mentioned that Norwegians were kind of taken back by the sarcastic remarks that you made. Like, I guess you tried to banter with them, right? Because
yeah.
yeah, that's what it is. And they didn't react well to that. What was the example of that?
I would meet someone that I'd known for a little while, and I would just say, "Oh, you look a bit tired today. What's up? You must have had a really heavy night last night." Or maybe I met another guy and I said, "So, seems like you were out on the town last night. What was her name?" Well, something just stupid. We use that as a bonding, to banter with people, and they look at me like, "No, I'm just tired." And it was like I could sense that it didn't connect at all, and I didn't quite get why. Of course, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to bond with them through banter, and that banter isn't quite as direct or as quick to banter with each other here in Norway. You have to tread a bit carefully. Having said that, once you know them, and it does take a while to kind of to bond with Norwegians and get that really good friendship, but once you've got it, you can say anything you like. Then it's British standards again, and there's loads of banter and lots of humor between us. But that stage where you can actually use it took a long time to get to. I found that, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's exactly what you said. Is that you use banter to kind of erase the formality between people, because if you can make fun of each other, that means you're close. You're on that close level.
Yeah,
Whereas with
exactly.
Norwegians, I feel like, and I've heard that there's a lot of, they say they don't like small talk, but there is quite a lot of small talk happening when it comes to staying in the safe space and not offending anyone and being really positive and not complaining and
Mm.
kind of putting on a bit of that appearance until you can really, really trust someone. Is that what it comes down to? Is that they're like a little bit scared to go into the dark and to the deep end of the conversation?
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot actually. I think one thing that's quite common in Scandinavia as an entity, to use there are many differences between the Scandos, but as a part of the world, harmony and conflict or being conflict shy is a very important part of life. You're trying to create nice environments, whether it's at work, at parties, and friendships. Um, and I think they found the banter a little bit too rough. You're kind of spoiling that harmony a bit. You're spoiling the nice atmosphere, and you're doing it a little bit too soon. Do you see what I mean?
Yes.
It's like walking into a dinner party and cracking a kind of an offensive joke straight away, and you don't know anybody. People look at you and go, "What?" It's a bit early for that. You've got to wait a bit. So yeah, that surprised me a bit. Of course, that sort of harmonious Norwegianness that I call it, the idea that we should get along. Getting along is really important. Yeah,
Mhm.
compromise. I often say there's a reason why they have the Nobel Peace Prize awarded in Oslo. It's like the champions of compromise and mediation. Yeah, that's something that's really important to them, and it shouldn't be taken lightly. And I know I've stepped on a few toes in the early days. Now, of course, I find myself being more cautious with people. Um, but that's in Norway. When I get back to the UK, all bets are off. Even Italy, actually, the south of Italy, with people, we like to make fun of each other. Uh, the Napoli people are famous for their sense of humor and for making fun of things. So it's all about adapting and being aware of your surroundings. I think it's nothing more really than using your social antenna wisely, right? It's just being aware, and I think awareness of surroundings is a really important skill these days. And I think a lot of people are kind of losing that awareness, that sensitivity to each other's. It seems to be that people just want to be about forwarding their opinions. We're not listening enough to others. We're not trying to tune into each other. So a lot of my work really is about teaching and showing people how to tune into each other. Absolutely.
Everyone, just a quick note to say that while I love putting these podcasts together each week, they do take a ton of time and effort. So if you're enjoying the show, please make sure to follow on YouTube, Spotify, wherever you're tuning in, and give this podcast a 5-star rating to help it grow. This support really helps me keep improving the show's quality. Thank you, and back to the episode. Yeah, you talk about the love of complaining in certain cultures as well. And I think maybe in the UK as well, people do bond through some negativity and taking the piss out of each other. And that's very interesting. You talked about other cultures that they have a love of complaining. You talked about the French. I do think I'm Russian, and without getting into Russian everything, but Eastern Europeans, we love to complain as well.
Yeah.
And we love to go very deep in conversations from the get-go. And a lot of the struggles that a lot of Eastern Europeans face is that they feel like in Scandinavia, you really do have to stay very safe from the beginning. You cannot really get deep right away with people. So what do you think about this? Like, why do certain cultures love to complain so much? Why is that such a bonding experience for some cultures?
First of all, there's a comfort in complaining, isn't there? It's not just about bonding. It feels good. Come on, let's be honest. It's good to have a good moan. It makes us feel good. So anything that makes us feel good is going to be easy to do, right? So that's the first part. The second part is, when I do my workshops in cross-cultural communication, a really important concept that I have to get people to understand and even accept is the idea that behind every behavior, there is usually a positive intention, right? Behind every behavior, there is usually a positive intention. You won't see it always, but there's a positive intention. So what could possibly be the positive intention of moaning and whinging? Like, first of all, it feels good. It actually provides a form of comfort. Secondly, and if people think this is a bit of a stretch, I think the positive intention behind complaining is to actually improve things. Is to highlight things. I would say the Dutch actually are the number one complainers of Europe. They're even proud of it. When I say that in audiences, the Dutch go kind of, yeah. Why do you do that? I think it's generally to try and improve things, to raise issues because we want to improve them. And I think that's the case for the French as well. And also in French culture and French history, you've got this, the philosophical, analytical approach to life is really important. This kind of skepticism, not accepting things without questioning them. I think that's part of the deal with the French as well. I know that's the deal with the British. Don't accept everything that people, especially the state or the government, present to you. And that's one of the things I found really frustrating coming to Norway. I found the Norwegians accepted things too much. They bought the story all the time from the state. And I was like, hang on a minute. Wait a sec, question it. And they would look at me and go, no, why? We live in the greatest country in the world and welfare system is the best in the world. And it's not until you dig down a bit and start questioning that you first highlight the holes and the shortcomings and secondly, improve them. So I think that's where it comes from. It's a combination of comfort and a willingness to improve things. Of course, if you're on the receiving end of the complaining, it doesn't feel good. You're not going to see that positive intention.
Yeah, great point. The Dutch do love to complain. I go around the world and I ask questions to different cultures, and there's definitely like a big agreement that Dutch are, I think, I wouldn't want to say number one complainers. I think French and the Dutch, like somewhat equally, but as you said correctly, I mean, the French, they do have a skepticism in their culture, and there's a critical approach to life in general, where you're never expert enough until you're really an expert. American person can start a project and everyone's going to cheer them on, but French people will say, well, do you have enough skills to switch your career into something else? I mean, if you want to get into YouTubing, have you taken YouTube courses? And do you know how to operate a camera? Have you spent enough time in this? And they will question until the end of time. And exactly that. Whereas the Dutch, of course, they're not as philosophical as the French, but they definitely like to, it's also the directness in the culture, right? Which I want to talk to you about as well.
Yeah.
When it comes to Scandinavians, because as we know, Scandinavians, the Danish are probably the most direct
Mm,
out of the Scandinavians, and Norwegians and the Swedes, of course, are the least direct, and
correct.
they don't like confrontation at all. And so I kind of want to know where Norway is on the spectrum of that. But you'll talk about something interesting as well, which is the economy of words. And I wanted to talk about this concept because that's the first time I've heard of that. And I think, what does the economy of words refer to, first of all?
First of all, it's like the economy of words is a concept I came up with by accident, actually. It's like how many words are absolutely necessary to get a message across. And the Nordics are really good at it. In other words, they tend to use the minimum amount of words in order to get a message across. Very efficient. And the analogy I use for it often is that God gave us this word quota. So he gave, like, the Italians 100 million words. When you use them up, you die. You're never going to use up 100 million words or 200 million, whatever. Yeah. But to the Norwegians, he gave them 20 million words, which means suddenly, hang on a sec, before I use up one of my words, I'm going to be really careful about what I say and when I actually say anything or let any words come out of my mouth. But again, the intention behind it is just to be efficient. If you look at an English dictionary is really thick because it's not only made up of English words, it's made up of Latin words, French and German and Nordic, and it's really thick. But if you pick up a Norwegian dictionary, it's half as thick. They simply don't have as many words. They don't have the nuances that English has, or French as well. French is full of nuances. Italian is full of nuances. All these tiny little words that mean different things. So when you don't have as many words to use, you're going to be much more efficient in the use of those words, right? People often say to me, why don't Norwegians small talk at bus stops and when you bump into them into the street? And I've thought about that a lot. And I think to myself, well, climate must have a lot to do with that, right? If you're walking along the streets of Oslo and it's -10 and the wind is blowing from the north and you meet someone that you're not going to stop very long for a chat. You're going to exchange a quick hello and move on. You do that in the middle of Italy, even in winter, it's still 15 degrees. You're going to stop. It's warm enough to stop and chat and just, talk about rubbish. So climate has a big influence in all this. But if you're an Italian coming to Norway, you will probably feel that Norwegians don't talk. That's your perception. They don't talk. It's not they don't talk. It's that they kind of measure up when it's necessary to share words. Of course, the most efficient, the most economic with words are the Finns, of course. They're so economic that they've actually put words together. That's really clever, okay? So instead of using 4 words, they say, no, we'll put them all together and call it a compound noun, and that counts as 1 word. It's fantastic, right? It's brilliant.
Have you heard of the joke where I think it's a Swede and a Finn, they go to a bar and the Swede says, yeah, let's cheers. And the Finn says, did we come here to talk or drink?
Talk to drink, fantastic, right? Yeah. I've heard lots of versions of that one. And again, there's a bit of stereotyping there as well, but there's a lot of truth in there as well. Also it's important to kind of point out the difference between a generalization and a stereotype. A stereotype tends to be a bit negative, but there are patterns of behavior amongst people. You can look at all cultures as a kind of a bell curve, right? Where you've always got outliers who don't fit into the mold, but you've got this middle part of the bell where a lot of people kind of fit into that pattern of behavior. And I haven't met many Norwegians who talk and talk and talk and talk. At least not before they drink.
That's a big one. It's also funny too because you'll meet introverts from other cultures and they will move to Scandinavia, right?
Yeah.
They will talk, and then they will realize that they're not actually introverted. I have my Brazilian assistant. She just moved to Sweden, and she says, I'm really introverted in Brazil, but I come to Sweden, and they say, "Oh my God, you are so outspoken. You are so expressive. You're so passionate." She says, "In Brazil, like I sit at home most of the time. I don't have many friends." So it's as you said, right? There are some outliers, but as a general rule, and especially I think when it comes to countries like Norway and Finland, which can be on the extreme end of that spectrum, like for the most part, people are not expressive to the point that they are expressive in other countries. Even if they are expressive, let's just say, of course, there are those few that really stand out of the pack. Those very international people, or there
Yeah.
are outliers. All the
But you raised an important point, actually, the relative difference between cultures and individuals. That's really important. So, again, when I run my workshops, we get into those nuances. It's not so much about the difference between an Italian and a Spaniard, but it's about that particular Spaniard and that particular Italian on a particular dimension of behavior. And it's the relative difference, you know? So here in Norway, I'm considered quite loud and extrovert. But after 29 years in Norway, when I go to Italy to meet my family, they'll they'll often say to me, "Are you okay? What do you mean, are you okay? You look really, really sad. Is everything okay? You know, is everything okay at home? I'm fine. I'm fine. Are you depressed?" It's everything is relative, and it's important to be aware of where your standpoint is. Where are you on these kind of behavioral dimensions? What do you see when you look at the world? This is the key to cultural understanding, I think.
Exactly. When you go back home, do you ever feel like a reverse culture shock, or do you ever feel frustrated about the distance between people? Like, this person is standing too close to me, and now I've gotten
Oh
used
yeah,
to the
yeah,
bigger distance, or these people are too expressive and they're asking too many questions, or I need some time alone away from these people. Do you feel like that?
absolutely. Oh God, I can hardly sit in a London restaurant and eat anymore. Feels like the next table is right next to my shoulder, listening in on my private conversations, for example, right? So I get that all the time, and again, it's just good to be aware of it and to feel and be aware of your reactions to what it's doing to you. Yeah, when I go to Italy now, I can't get any private space. Got to be. They always want to know where I am. Are you coming to dinner? Where are you? What are you doing? Why do you always go and sit upstairs on your own? And I just wanted to go and read, and it's really, really funny. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the interesting thing about culture is there are two things. Something that has happened to you through getting used to your life in Norway. You've gotten used to those distances. You've gotten used to the silence.
Mm,
You've gotten used to that. And then I also think, and I want to hear your perspective on that. People say, well, culture is just culture. It doesn't, you're just a person. But I think, growing up in a certain culture, we all want to be liked and we all want to belong as people, right? And so you are going to behave in a way that is accepted within a society. So that is
mm,
how culture is formed. It's not just, oh, you're Norwegian, so you're just going to be reserved because you're Norwegian. It's like, if you grow up in
mm.
Norway, you have to get used to that way of life. And as such, you are, part of it is this genetics. Part of that is just the way that you're used to living your life. And part of that is wanting to be accepted in the society and not feeling like an outcast as well.
Yeah, you've raised some very insightful. Actually, the most powerful driver of humans is the sense of belonging. I need to belong to a group, whatever that group is. We don't, it doesn't matter what group, but you want to belong to a group. Our biggest fear, and this is from evolution, is to not be part of a group. It creates fear inside us.
Hmm.
It's a survival fear. That's the number one driver. Culture is a group phenomenon. And even those who say, I'm not typically Brazilian, I'm not typically Finn, they say that because they know what the standard is, right? So they're aware of it. That's why they say, I'm not typically. So they're aware of it. Okay. Culture's like water to a fish or air to people. We're not aware of it until it's not there anymore.
Hmm.
But it's all around us. And I think one of the easiest ways to explain cultures, it's a culture is something, or a cultural behavior is something that's accepted and familiar. It's familiar. You've seen it many times. It's accepted. It's okay to be like that in that situation. And then you as an individual can decide whether or not you want to be part of that dance or that game. And some people opt out. They don't want to be part of that. Genetics could be part of it, your story, your individual life, whatever. But that's okay. But you know what the accepted and familiar is. You cannot live in a culture and not be aware of that. You need to
Yeah.
be really like isolated, live in a cave or something to not be aware of it. It's a really powerful force, and it can be used in good ways and bad ways. So a lot of the woke cancel culture is a kind of a culture, if you like, where it's suddenly not okay to share your honest opinions unless it goes along with the crowd. So what do? A lot of people, we opt out.
Mhm.
We still watch our social media, but we don't comment anymore for fear of being cast out.
Yeah.
So it's a powerful, powerful force, and it can be used in positive and negative ways. I don't know if I answered your question there.
Yeah, you did. You did so beautifully. And as you said correctly as well before, it's not that someone's doing something right or wrong. It's just that they come from a completely different lens and a completely different
Yeah.
set of ways of doing things. So if you think, someone is incredibly indirect or incredibly direct or direct to the
Mm.
point of rudeness, as an example, Norwegians, a lot of expats have shared with me that they can come off as rude as well because they simply, for example, if they want you to pass something to them, the Brits, they have a million words. Could you please, if it's not too inconvenient, could you pass this?
Yeah.
Norwegians will just say salt, or they will even reach for it themselves without even
Yeah, we
asking
have a
you.
concept in Norway called the Norwegian Arm. I don't know if you've heard of
I
that, yeah?
have, yes, yes.
That's a brilliant. So the Norwegian Arm, if you're not aware, if you're listening, what is the Norwegian Arm? You're sitting at a table and you want the salt. Instead of asking the guy next to you to pass the salt, you wait until the guy next to you is distracted or looking somewhere else, and you reach your arm out and grab it yourself. Now, the first time I thought that was, well, what's the positive intention behind that? That is, come on, just ask for the salt. The positive intention is simple. I don't want to disturb you. You seem to be in a really cool conversation. I don't want to disturb you. I'll reach across and I'll do it quickly while you're not looking. There you go. And it sounds really like, a tiny detail in life. But if you can get the attitude in your mind that, oh, that's weird, but it's also interesting, and the positive intention is this. Do you know what that does to you? That actually lowers your stress levels. If you can see things with a sense of humor, looking for that positive intention, and it's not naivety, this is real everyday stuff. It lowers your cortisol levels. It allows you to deal with life a little better.
Yeah, it's a great point because I feel like so many people that come to Norway and Scandinavia, they just spend their time complaining about how difficult it is. And I'm not saying that it's not. It can be incredibly difficult. As you said, you've faced many struggles in Norway. And I
Yeah.
actually wanted to ask you about a few of those struggles. But I think that the concept of politeness can differ so much around the world, right? And I've
Mm.
heard of this referred as negative politeness, which is in countries that are warmer, like Italy. Positive politeness is something where if someone is sitting by themselves, you'll be like, join us. We
Mm.
have a group
Mm.
here, join us. That's being
Mm.
polite. But in Norway, to do that is interfering into someone's space. As you said, you don't want to bother people, and so
Mm.
it's actually more polite to let them be, to let them carry their own luggage, to let them get their own salt, to let them do
Mm.
their own thing, because you don't want to interfere into their life. And Norwegians have said this to me that they feel like often they're in their own head and then they're in their own thoughts and they actually don't want to be disturbed. So I also
Yeah.
feel like that they come into life very different, whereas Italians, generally speaking, they're looking for interactions. They're
Mm.
raised to interact with other people,
Mm.
right? They
Mm.
like the social aspect of their life. And so you strike up conversations with people because you want to connect, and Norwegians probably will find that a very awkward experience.
Well, again, looking back, if you look back in history, because I think a lot, where does this come from? Why do Italians like to chat to people? I think actually, I'm going to turn it a little bit around here. I think Italians, if you go back a couple of centuries, because trust levels are so low in Italy, you don't do it to be sociable. You do the social thing to check if the person is a potential threat. You're tuning in on them. Let me talk to you and see if you're okay. And if I like you and we get along, then I can trust you. Whereas in Norway, the trust levels are so high, you don't need to do that. You accept that we trust each other. We're much more trusting of each other. Plus, if you look at the population density in Norway, which is very low compared to most of Italy, okay, especially in the cities, we have this luxury of space around us. We're not going to have potential threats around us as much, right? If you go to cities like New York, people generally ignore each other. Why? Because there's so many of us going past each other all the time. I can't deal with so much interaction all the time, so we ignore each other. Again, it comes back to this positive intention. There's usually a good reason why we act the way we do. What's important is that I don't do it to be rude to you. I don't do it to ignore you. I don't do it to send out signals that I don't like you. It's quite the opposite. There's a positive intention. And we're not always aware of them ourselves, actually. So this, again, I keep going back to this point. This is the key to cultural awareness, is to have that interest, that curiosity. Why? I wonder why they do that. Let me find out. Let me explore. Let me go in there with an open mind to find out where this behavior is coming from. That opens up a lot of doors. And I think it shows in our attitude as well. Once you have that curiosity, people like that. They tune into it. I know that my fortunes here in Norway changed much better when I started doing two things. Number one, speak Norwegian. So my Norwegian's pretty good. That opened up a lot of doors, even though Norwegians speak great English, as many Scandinavians do. And the other one was when I suddenly started coming into rooms like this. Ah, weird Norwegians. I wonder why you do that. They love it, and it's this curiosity rather than, oh, God, here I am. Oh, God, there's the bloody Norwegian army. Oh, fuck. Can't you just learn? Can you see the difference there? You're sending out very different energies. It's really important, actually.
I mean, if you read the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, the main rule of that book itself is to be interested in people. And you've
Right?
taken that a step further, is to be interested in the culture and why they do the things that they do.
Yeah.
And also, I think, I don't know if you'd explicitly mentioned this right now, but you said you come into the room with an attitude of, you know what, you guys can be reserved, but I'm going to bring a little bit more
Yeah.
energy, and I'm going to inquire, and I'm going to lead it, because I feel like they're a little bit like magnets. They're a little bit like, well, if the other person is not showing the interest, that I'm not going to start the conversation first. But if you are leading with more energy, then people love that. Maybe
Of
not as
course.
much energy as, like they say, a stereotypical American coming in and just being loud and overbearing.
Hmm.
Again, I don't think all Americans are like that.
No, no,
I
no.
feel really bad for Americans that they have this stereotype in general. But I think there's, like, what you're saying is being genuinely curious in people.
That is the word, the genuinely curious. By the way, being curious doesn't mean I agree with them. I can still disagree with them. I can still think that certain things in Norway are crap, even after 29 years. But I understand why they do it. That's really important. It's that genuine curiosity. I want to know about you. I want to find out more about you. And a word like respect, which is overused today. I'm a linguist by trade. Respect is a beautiful word. It actually means to look again. Respect. Spect is to look, again. Look again. A new perspective. Curiosity. Can I find out anything else about you that I didn't know from before? But it doesn't mean to agree. You don't have to agree with people to be curious about them.
Now, you talk about Scandinavians and the Brits as being super law abiding. Do you think that shows up in the way people run their lives? And, is there a big planning culture? How does this influence the way people live?
And these are all, yeah, I think so. These are all theories of mine. You won't find these in a book anywhere, but driving styles, the way people drive. Yeah, I do a lot of traveling in my work, and I used to do an awful lot around the world before. You could land at any airport. It's that taxi ride into the city. It says so much about how people think and act. So the obvious one is that, Norwegians, the vast majority of Norwegians follow speed limits when they drive. Not all, but the vast majority. That's got also to do with the fact that they have some of the highest fines in the world if you get caught speeding. I mean, they're pretty draconian. But it says something about their attitude to rules and their attitude to the state as well. So, yeah. And the Brits, again, I was in the UK last week. The Brits, they drive slightly over the speed limit, but not many drive lots over the speed limit. Not in the week I was there, at least. And I'm very observant because I'm looking for it, right? I'm looking, how do they drive? Go to Germany on the autobahns with no speed limits, all right? So you can drive as fast as you like. So the rule is no speed limit. So I will drive as fast as I want. And some drive very fast. But as soon as you hit these 90 kilometers an hour zones, they all slow down to 90. All of them. And they all drive at 90. And then I come along in my car driving to Italy, and on purpose I drive faster than them because I like to see the reactions of the other drivers as I drive faster than that 90 kilometers an hour. And you get some really dirty looks from people like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Then they look at my Norwegian number plate and think, I thought Norwegians followed rules. What they don't know, of course, is there's an Italian behind the wheel driving that Norwegian car. So yeah, it does really stand out. And driving is a really good indicator. The other one, as you mentioned, is space, how close we stand to each other. I always look at that. We're talking centimeters, but in Norway, you stand an arm length and a hand away from each other. So in the UK, it's an arm's length like this. And in Norway, it's an arm's length and a hand. It's not much long, but it's a little bit longer. Middle East, it's half an arm. So the distance people between them, volume of voice, expressiveness, how much people move their arms, pretty obvious basic things, but they tell us a lot about people's sociability, people's willingness to interact. And again, all is based on positive intentions. Remember, cultures are built to create an environment that is for our better. It's for our good. It's for the good of the group.
Yeah.
You might not agree with it, but it's for the good of the group.
Have you noticed anything that is, of course you have, that is different when it comes to gatherings, even let's say between the UK and Norway, how people interact?
Yeah. You're thinking of dinner parties or concerts or...
Yeah, dinner parties, I think, are a prime example of this. Are a good
Yeah,
example.
I mean, I found in Norway, and this is one of the things that irritated me for many. It still kind of does, actually. It feels like Norwegians aren't as spontaneous as Italians. Everything has to be organized, or you need a reason to gather. But once they have that reason and they gather, they're really good at gathering. Norwegians are really good at gathering. So this has been recorded just before Christmas now. Christmas in Norway is great. They're really good at it. They gather in their families. They make great food. The snow, the feel, it's postcard picture stuff. It's fantastic. And they're really warm and loving. And it's fantastic. I've spent every single Christmas in Norway since I moved here. They're really good at it. But you need a reason to do it. Christmas, or their Constitution Day, or it's a confirmation of a child, or a wedding, or a 50th birthday party. Some of the best 50th birthday parties I've ever been to have been in Norway. They're really good at it. But there's a gathering, it's organized. But spontaneity is a bit low here. I find it a bit low. And that kind of irritates me because I found the Brits even are more spontaneous, and certainly the Italians much more spontaneous. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that if there is a reason, then they really go all out. They really plan every detail of it. I can imagine.
Yeah. They need that reason, and it needs to be organized. I know that when I got married here in Norway, that my Italian side of the family, they loved it. They thought it was fantastic, but they thought it was a little bit organized with all the speeches and the first we do this and then we do that. And then it's all a bit, or Italian weddings are a bit more chaotic. Everyone's eating and laughing and shouting, and it's just less organized, as it were. It seems to be more of an outburst of emotion rather than an organized demonstration of emotion, if I can put it like that.
Yeah. And, you were married in Norway. I mean, I don't know if you're still partners, if you're still
We are,
together.
yeah.
Okay, great. And have you experienced any kind of funny anecdotes when it came to cultural differences in your relationship?
Well, the obvious ones were the volume at which we speak. She would say, "Why are you getting so angry?" Angry? I'm not even in third gear yet. Stuff like that. That's a classic. Interrupting. Oh, I really struggle with that. So, in Norway, the speech patterns they're really good at taking turns, talk, 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 talk. And the other person nods, maybe the odd, mm-mm. And then they stop and then they how it works. In Italy, it's overlap, overlap, overlap. The way they drive as well. In Italy, if you want to pull out of a side road, you have to force yourself out into the road. You have to be really aggressive. Just like speaking, you have to interrupt to speak. Here in Norway, when they pull out of side roads, they wait and wait and wait and wait until somebody lets them in. It's infuriating. And I still find that a difficult way to speak, turn taking. So I learned a trick, which was given to me by someone else who struggled with the same thing. In meetings now in Norway, to stop myself from interrupting, I put my hand over my mouth. I sit in the meeting like this, and they're probably thinking, "What's he doing behind? Is he yawning?" No, it's a reminder to myself to shut them up. Let them talk.
It comes down to the to the reactiveness. I think certain cultures um, are more reactive than other cultures. Italian being such a prime example of the reactiveness. A friend of mine, she says she's Italian and she's from the north of Italy. You know, keep
Yeah,
that in mind. But even she says my boyfriend always thinks I'm yelling at him. But even the way she talks
yeah,
feels like
yeah,
she's so
yeah.
expressive, you know?
Right.
And I can imagine Southern Italy, Naples, I mean, is even more so. And I think, and it can probably translate to having disagreements. When you're having a disagreement, how you deal with that differs so much in different cultures. Certain cultures are more, and I can imagine Norwegians, and I would love to hear what you think about it. But Norwegians are more rational, and they put emotions. They're able, at least, to put emotions aside, whereas a lot of cultures are driven by emotions, and it's something that they cannot hold in, and they need to get a word in as soon as possible, and they need to interrupt. They need to say their piece
Yeah,
of
yeah,
mind.
absolutely. We've had those discussions. You're describing basically a lot of the arguments we've had where my wife, and it's an individual thing, it's a personality thing as well, obviously, but there's this kind of ability to remain in the head as we speak and discuss and disagree and argue. I can't keep it. It goes down and it comes from the stomach, and I'm shouting and I try to say that it's because I care. As I often say, if we're ever having an argument and I'm calm, that's a bad sign. That means we've gone beyond and now I don't care anymore. Say what you like. I've already decided what I'm going to do. That's a bad sign. Um, and in fact, even if you look at some of the old Godfather movies from the 70s, it's really serious when one of the mafia guys is calm. Whenever they're calm, you've got trouble coming. If you look at Michael Corleone in that film, I know it's a long time ago, but there's a main character, Michael Corleone. Whenever he's calm, danger is just round the corner. So I said to my wife, the more I shout and scream, the better we are, the more we get along, actually. But it's difficult. It's strange. I have tried to adapt, though, absolutely. And I would argue that I've become calmer over the years when we fight and argue at home. Yeah.
And is there a reason for that? Do you think genuinely that Scandinavians, on the whole, as you said, it does depend on the person. Um, but on the whole, do you feel like that they have less temperament? Is
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
why? Okay.
Well, no, it's not. They don't. They have the same temperament, but if you live in Scandinavia, if you live in Norway, there's something about your surroundings: the forests, the sea, the fjords, the open landscapes, the kind of relentless climate, especially in winter, that forces you to accept your environment and to calm down. It's an environment thing. Whereas I challenge you to be calm all the time if you live in the back streets of Napoli. It's hustle, bustle, shouting, movement. It affects you. And I think that's a major part of the Scandinavian mindset is that calm, that nature. And you've got it in Canada as well, in many places in Canada, right? It's
Mhm.
the expanse, the sense of awe when you look around you at nature. It calms you down. It makes you feel small in a way. I think that has a lot to do with it, actually.
Yeah, and I also think that they do a lot of sports outside, right? They go
They're
skiing.
always outside. Yeah, absolutely. Again, I'm sure you have the same expression. There's no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothes. Yeah. You're always outside. Kids are always outside. And that's one amazing thing I've learned here in Norway. I'm always outside. I get dressed and I go out regardless. I think that's really cool with the Norwegians and the Scandos. Weather is no limit. You get out and you enjoy the nature and the environment that you live in.
Yeah, you've raised a great point. I think it is really so much about the environment when you're constantly stressed out from trying to get through your day. You know, with people
Mm.
basically not respecting any road rules. You're trying to cross the road. You have to, see if you can get through safely. Someone's interrupting you. You're waiting 10 minutes for an order to come through. That's a part of it, right? And probably another part of it is also just genetics. maybe that could be another reason. Maybe you're raised in a family where that was the case, where people used to interrupt each other and to talk
Mm.
over each other, and just
Well,
maybe.
culture is learned, isn't it? Culture
Mhm.
is learned. You learn it. You're not born like that. You learn it from your environment. So, yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah, I wonder if you take a Norwegian and you put them in Italy, if they are going to behave completely differently, right?
Well, there's an element of, there's always that balance. To what extent do I remain true to myself? And to what extent am I willing to adapt to my environment in order to be accepted by it? And that balance is really difficult to find sometimes. So, if I want to, I can be a chameleon. I can just be completely Norwegian if I want to all the time. However, it will feel not authentic, as if it's not me. I have to find that balance between being me and adapting to my environment. That's taken me a long time to kind of get right. I feel I've got it right now. I can kind of, I, I, I feel as if I fit into the Norwegian society. I know them. I know how to connect with them. But I also feel I'm myself as well. And I also feel that I'm, to a large degree, accepted by Norwegians. That's also really important because I've been willing to learn, be curious, adapt, learn the language, all those kind of obvious things. Well, I say obvious, many people don't bother. They don't bother to adapt, they don't bother to learn the language. They kind of remain, this is me, take it or leave it attitude. And often people will leave it, they won't take it.
How has living in Norway changed you as a person? I mean, have you discovered parts of your personality that you weren't aware of
Yeah,
before?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's an age thing as well. I'm not 20 anymore. I'm not 30 anymore. I was 30 when I came here. I was 60 now. So it's like age is a major part. But if there's one thing I think Norway's done to me, it's calmed me down in a good way. I'll
Mm,
probably live longer from being in Norway than if I'd stayed in the UK or even moved back to Italy. I think so, actually.
mm,
That calmness you get with living here, maybe not the most exciting environment, but certainly this kind of gratitude for nature, gratitude for the good things in life, a country that's very safe compared to many other countries, where you have this safety net of life called the welfare state if you should need it. Luckily, I've never needed the welfare state that much until now, so it's cool. I consider myself a good taxpayer here in Norway. But it's there, right? It's always there. And I think the nicest thing about Norway is that it's a great place for kids to be.
mm.
I've got 3 kids. They're beautiful people. And I know that Norway is a part of that. It's not just because they've got great parents, right? It's because they live in this really cool country that allows kids to be kids where the pressure on them is relatively less than if they'd grown up in the States or China or Korea.
Yeah. Yeah, because I feel like the other part of it that, we haven't talked about yet, but it's that there's less drive to achieve more, and there's more of a sense
Yeah,
of work-life balance and just enjoying each
absolutely.
moment. Maybe not enjoying each moment, because enjoying each moment is what you think of when you think of countries like Brazil. But there's more of a sense of asking for less from life in the sense of material good.
Yeah, yeah. On the one hand, they do ask for less. They're less demanding, I think is the word. They're less demanding. However, having said that, because life is so good on many aspects of life, their expectations level of what is normal is quite high.
Mm,
So that can turn to a bit of self-centeredness, perhaps even a bit spoiled. So again, that's a really important balance with my own kids. They live in a country where they're very privileged. They really are compared to my childhood. At the same time, I take them to Italy and to the UK every year. I take them to the south of Italy. They see the other side. So my family actually lives in a village outside the mountains of Naples. They're not in the city of Naples, where it's completely normal for the water to just turn off in the middle of the day in July. There's no water. When is it coming back? Could be a couple of days, could be a week. Who knows? That kind of, oh, is that what it's like? And this is Europe, right? This is Europe, the Western world. So they're in touch with that. I make sure that they're in touch with that. But they know they live in a really cool country, a country that does many things well. Not everything well, but many things well.
yeah. For any individuals that are, trying to assimilate in a different environment. You've raised a couple of really great points already, but if there's anything else that you wanted to add, like, do you have any practical tips that you give to people for improving communication?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious one is this idea of being genuinely curious, which is a proactive thing. You have to force yourself to do it, because if you don't, your brain will tell you not to do it, so you won't. The easy option is that it's much easier to moan than be curious, right? Plus, moaning feels good, like we mentioned before. The other thing is learn the language. And some people say, yeah, but I'm only going to be here for a couple of years. Is it worth it? But, if you're going to be there on a 5-year or even potentially forever, you've got to learn the language. And I say that because it opens so many doors for me. I mean, they love it when you speak Norwegian. And they're always like, wow, you speak really good Norwegian. And they love it. They just love that someone's taken the time to learn a language which is so tiny in the world, right? So, and the other thing is to be proactive about your social connections. I mean, this might not be for everybody, but I actively avoided Brits and Italians in Norway. I didn't want to be with them. Why? Because I wanted to be with Norwegians. I wanted to know about them. I wanted to get to know them. Even though I moaned about them, I wanted to understand them. I think that was also, looking back on that was a smart move. It didn't feel smart at the time, but looking back, it is smart. So I'm not saying avoid them completely, but don't get caught in that trap where you get sucked into the expat world where you're only hanging around with. I don't think that's very healthy.
A lot of people complain that it's incredibly hard to make friends in Norway. I mean,
Yeah.
how has it been for you? What has helped you with that?
Yeah, it's a sport, actually, sport. So again, back to the friendships are made through organized groups, clubs, sewing clubs, skiing clubs, football. The Norwegians have a club for everything. You got to find. Now we got Facebook. Facebook will help you find them really quickly. In the old days, you have to go to the post office and look at little posters on the board and that. Yeah, but you've got to get involved, because as soon as you find something in common, a sport, an activity, you've got something to talk about, and then you're away. And then the other thing, of course, is patience. It takes a hell of a long time. It takes a real. Italians can be warm and friendly instantly, but they don't get very deep with them. They're a bit superficial.
Hmm.
Norwegians are the other way around. You don't seem to get anywhere for ages, and then suddenly you're into welcome to my inner circle, and then you're there forever. It's great. So
Yeah.
patience,
Mhm.
learn the language, get involved in clubs.
Yeah, you raised a great point that it may seem like it's really easy to make friends in those very extroverted to strangers' countries, but
Yeah,
where interactions are incredibly easy to come by, where people are already incredibly open, those interactions also mean less. Right?
yeah,
It's like starting a relationship with someone incredibly flirtatious that comes up to every woman. It's like,
yeah,
versus someone that will never approach a woman. But if
yeah.
he does, or if you approach him, that
They have
actually
something.
means
Yeah, it
something.
means something. Got something meaningful to share. Exactly. So, again, I don't know if you were to ask me which one is better. I don't know really.
Mm,
They both have their pros and cons. But yeah, anyone moving to Norway or any of the Nordic countries, it takes a long time, but it's worth persevering.
yeah. Pellegrino, thank you so much for chatting to me. I'm so excited to have you. I really, really loved your TEDx TED Talks. I mean, firstly, because it was so information filled, but secondly, because you have a way of delivering information that is with a great sense of humor and it's very relatable. And it
Mm,
just makes you seem as like someone, like just someone that you can really talk to about anything, which I think is going to be a lot more interesting for people that are listening or watching this to relate to. And if anyone has any questions, please write them below, whether on Spotify or our YouTube, wherever you're watching or listening. Once again, thank you so much for this.
thanks so much for inviting me. It's been great fun. Thanks again.